When you think about fighting crime, what comes to mind? Car chases, maybe? Forensic labs? Well, today, one of the biggest weapons out there isn't about looking at one clue at a time. It's about mapping the entire criminal world. We're talking about taking all those secret, invisible connections and making them totally visible.
Okay, let's look at a real-world case. Operation Trojan Shield. This was wild. Investigators secretly ran an encrypted phone company that criminals thought was safe. But they weren't just listening in. Nope, they were mapping the entire web of who was talking to whom. And the result? Get this. They uncovered the structure of over 300 different global crime syndicates. 300! I mean, that is just a staggering number.
And look, this wasn't just some theory on a whiteboard. We're talking about real impact. That one operation? It led to seizing over $48 million in cash, not to mention tons of drugs and hundreds of arrests. So the big question is, how on earth did they pull it off?
It turns out the key wasn't just what the criminals were saying. I mean, that was useful for sure, but the real game changer was analyzing the pattern of who they were talking to. It stopped being about the what and became all about the who talks to whom. That's what laid the entire hidden power structure bare.
And this brings us to the tool that made it all possible. It's called Social Network Analysis, or SNA for short. And believe me, it is completely changing the game for how law enforcement understands and, more importantly, takes down these massive criminal organizations.
So what is it really? Well, at its heart, SNA is all about making invisible things visible. It's like this. You take all this messy, complicated data, thousands of phone records, endless money transfers, and you turn it into a clear, simple map. And once you have that map, you can actually see the patterns, the connections you would have never spotted otherwise.
And every single one of these maps is built from just two basic pieces. It's actually pretty simple. First, you've got what they call nodes. Think of these as the dots on the map. They can be people, companies, whatever. Then you have the links. These are just the lines connecting the dots. A link could be a phone call, a money wire, a meeting, anything that connects two nodes. That's it. But when you put thousands of these together, suddenly you have this incredibly powerful picture of the entire criminal underworld.
Okay, so you have this map. Now what? Well, now, investigators can ask the most important question of all. Who's the real kingpin? Who really matters in this whole setup? And more importantly, where's the weakest link? You might be surprised by the answer. This is where it gets really interesting, because it shows there are two totally different kinds of important players. First, you have the hub. This is the person you'd expect. They have the most direct connections, they're always busy talking to everyone. They're the obvious target, right? But then there's the broker. This person might not have a ton of connections, but the ones they have are absolutely crucial. They're the bridge between different groups that would otherwise be totally disconnected. They literally control the flow of information and resources. The criminologist Carlo Morcelli said it perfectly. He called brokers the essential glue that holds the whole illegal market together. Think about it. Taking out a flashy hub makes a big splash, sure. But if you take out that quiet broker, you can shatter the entire network because you've just cut the lines of communication between all the different moving parts. Okay, but here's the twist, and it's a big one. These criminal networks, they're not static. They're almost like living things. When you attack them, they don't always just fall apart. Sometimes they actually adapt and get even stronger.
And this leads to a really scary question for investigators. What if going after the kingpin, the most obvious move, is actually the wrong move? What if it makes things worse?
And I'm not just talking hypothetically here. There was a real case study called Project Caviar, looking at a cannabis network. And what they found was absolutely wild. When they ran simulations of taking out the big players, the network didn't just survive. A lot of the time, it bounced back even more efficient and tougher than it was before. How is that possible? Okay, so here's how this resilience paradox works. Step 1, investigators map the network. Step 2, they take out a big central hub. For a little while, everything's a mess, right? The network is fragmented. But then, the criminals who are left scramble. They start forming new, direct connections with each other, basically cutting out the middleman who just got arrested. And what's the end result? You've got a smaller, leaner network that's just learned how to survive an attack. It's actually harder to break now.
So, if the network can learn and adapt, how do you beat it? Well, you have to get smarter too. The cutting-edge strategies now look at more than just where someone sits on the map. They're combining two different ideas of what makes a criminal valuable.
On the one hand, you've got social capital. This is pretty simple. It's who you know. It's the value you have because of your connections, because you're a hub or a broker. But then there's human capital, and this is all about what you can do. It's about your specific, unique skills. Are you the guy who can forge a perfect passport? The electrician who knows how to steal power for a massive grow operation? These are skills that are really, really hard to replace.
A really chilling but powerful example of this comes from the analysis of the 9/11 terrorist network. When they mapped it out, they saw that the most critical people weren't just the brokers with lots of connections. They were the brokers who also had a unique skill, like being a pilot. See, when you take out someone who has high social capital and high human capital, you create a hole in the network that is almost impossible to fill. That's how you cause real lasting damage.
And this whole way of thinking isn't just for taking down drug gangs or terrorists. It's being used everywhere now. Investigators are using social network analysis to map out everything from complex money laundering schemes to international sanctions evasion.
Let's take sanctions evasion, for example. So, say the EU blocks Russia from buying some kind of critical technology. What do the analysts do? They start mapping the global trade data. And suddenly, they see something weird. A country like Kazakhstan, out of nowhere, starts importing a huge amount of that exact same tech from the EU, like a 137% surge. And then what happens right after? You guessed it. Kazakhstan's exports of that same tech to Russia spike. By mapping those links, the whole rerouting scheme becomes plain as day. The hidden network is exposed.
But we have to be realistic here. As powerful as all this is, network analysis isn't some magic bullet. It's not perfect. Why? Because the very nature of crime means you're almost always working with a puzzle that has missing pieces.
I mean, think about the challenges analysts are up against. The data is never complete, right? Criminals are actively trying to cover their tracks. The data they do get can be wrong, full of errors, or just plain lies. You have the same person using 5 different names, which makes things super inconsistent. And then there's the classic signal versus noise problem. If one person's name keeps popping up, does that mean they're the boss? Or does it just mean the police are already watching them really closely? These are the tough, real-world problems that make this job so hard.
So all this leaves us with one final big question. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, right? Criminals learn, they adapt, their networks change shape. The question is, as these criminal structures evolve, can our methods for seeing them, for mapping them, evolve even faster? Because honestly, the answer to that question is going to define the future of how we fight organized crime.